Hello, my little cardboard connoisseurs. This is Richard here, just making you aware, in case it isn't obvious, that the views expressed by Matt Jarvis on this episode of We're Not Wizards, they're his own. They don't represent that of either Tabletop Gaming Magazine or the Warners Group, just so we're 100% clear. So sit back, tune in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to another episode of We're Not Wizards. This is a special show, and the title of the show is going to be called From Cardboard to Shiny Paper. Now, I know why it's called that, and you will know why it's called that, because joining me this evening is a gentleman by the name of Matt Jarvis. Now, for those who enjoy the hobby and like to find out as much what's going on in the hobby in terms of news and reviews, but like it to be written down and printed as well as on a website, Matt Jarvis is the editor of Tabletop Gaming Magazine, so I'm super excited to have him here. So hello Matt, how are you?
Hey Richard, I'm alright, thanks. How's it going?
Very good indeed.
Thanks for having me on.
It's a delight. I mean, this is episode 51, so we thought, well, we've done our first 50, so if we're going to start the next kind of half century, we better kind of start off with somebody rather special. So
that's a good way of putting it. It's like not the big 50, but just afterwards.
Well, I kind of thought, you know what, see when we put out the episode with Frank, I thought, do I wait? And me and Frank had such a good, we had such a laugh, and I'm not saying we're not going to have a laugh, I'm just talking myself into a hole as we speak. But
I take no offence. I'll take 51. Normally, I'm much lower down than that, so 51's grand.
There you go. For people that haven't listened to the show before, the reason that we do this is because there's not enough podcasts out there about board games. I have scoured iTunes to find them, and I can't find them. So that means there's no need for you to scour them. I guess to get started, do you want to tell some people about kind of your history with a hobby, kind of how you got into board games kind of in the first place?
Blimey. I guess, I mean, not to go all crazy on you, but I guess it, like most people, it started when I was a kid. I mean, I was an obsessive collector of Warhammer, particularly I collected Tomb Kings for a long time. Then I moved on to the Lord of the Rings Warhammer once those films came out and so on. I think I subscribed to a magazine, and you got like a model every month or so on one of those horrifically expensive magazines where it's like £5 for the first issue and then £15 every time afterwards.
And it's for like the next 100 years or something like that. So
yeah. And I think when I was 18 or something, I went into the garage and just found sprues and sprues of just unpainted sort of Gondor knights. And felt incredibly bad for my parents. But yeah, so it all started when I was a kid with Warhammer collecting. Strangely enough, I didn't play them as much. I never played miniature games as much as I like to paint them. I played them, but often in sort of simplified forms, I guess, because I was quite young at the time.
Yeah.
And there was a lot going on. But I really enjoyed painting. Actually, when I applied for this job, one of the first things I put in my covering letter was that I'd won my middle school Warhammer painting competition, because I figured that was as good an accolade as any to put on there, really.
That was a good start. First of all,
yeah.
Let me tell you how much I'm into gaming. I won a prize at middle school, and eventually they went, "No, get him in. He's interview material. We've got."
They did bring it up in my interview. They brought it up.
Did they?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Did they? I take it. They didn't actually ask you to see any models then for proof?
No. I think those models are long gone.
Oh, that's a shame.
Fortunately, they never asked about my gluing capability because I was terrible at gluing stuff together. I had a catapult that I got for Christmas,
right,
and it just stayed in bits for like 8 years or so. Because every time I tried to super glue it together, it fell apart again immediately.
I was just wondering about the job thing, if they maybe did kind of put you in a room and say, okay, if you're this good, then paint that, because you know what they're like with checking references. Maybe they decided to put you kind of under a little kind of
just like a speed painting test.
Yeah, it's like if you ever went to a recruitment agency when you were younger, they did like, let's see what your word per minute score is. So they said, okay, you've got an orc, you've got a goblin, you've got an elf here, you've got a barbarian. Here's your colour choices. Which ones are you going for and why? The green.
Show us your basing. Show us your washing.
Exactly. And you walk out saying, well, how did you do? Rubbish. Why? I went pink for the goblin. I just knew the green was sitting there, and I thought my green, but then I second guessed myself, and I went for the pink instead for the goblin. So I just mucked it up.
Nothing wrong with pink. There was I think on eBay, there was a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago now, there was a My Little Pony custom Warhammer 40k army that was all pink and had bits of My Little Pony stuck to tanks and Space Marines and all sorts. It looked incredible. I mean, it was an amazing job.
I think when you get to that level, there's a special name for people that like My Little Pony. I think you're called
Bronies. Yes.
That's an entirely different conversation, potentially for an entirely different podcast as well. Now, moving on, you started your painting. So when did you kind of flip into the kind of the cardboard side of things, or did you stick with miniatures?
So I sort of was into miniatures probably into my sort of early teenage years, and then I guess with school and university and so on, I slipped out of the hobby completely, sort of the tabletop hobby.
Yeah.
I obviously played board games here and there, but they were more your traditional style. I probably dabbled in Catan and whatnot every now and then. And it was actually, I think, one of my first years at university. I had some friends over to watch WrestleMania, obviously the WWE wrestling event, and to fill the time before it was on, because it was on at stupid o'clock in the morning over here, sort of like 1, 2-ish or something.
Yeah.
We swung by Waterstones of all places, because that was sort of the equivalent of a tabletop game shop in Canterbury.
Yeah.
And we picked up Catan, we picked up Carcassonne.
Yeah.
I can't remember if we picked up something else, but we definitely picked up those two. And then we spent the next sort of like 6 hours playing them. And obviously, you know, nowadays people sort of look at Catan and Carcassonne with this sort of weary eye of like, oh yeah, of course, everybody's played those. But, you know, they earned that legacy because they are such fantastic gateway games. They do capture a lot of what is so great about tabletop gaming, and make it easy. And then from there, you know,
was that it? That was it for you? You just kept
going? So I then sort of shot up to the harder end of the scale. I think one of my purchases not long after that was Eclipse, with the first expansion included. I brought it off eBay to account for the fact that it was quite expensive and I was still on student sort of wages at the time.
Just well work for cardboard kind of thing.
Exactly. So yeah, we dived into Eclipse, and I think our first game took us about 8 hours or something insane.
Yeah. I mean, Frank West that was on the show, the last show, he's a massive Eclipse fan, and he says that he does like regularly kind of 11-hour sessions where they just have food and then people just dive in and kind of dive in and out the game and take turns, and it can take basically kind of half a day. So, but that sounds like a fairly heavy level to kind of dive into.
Yeah, I think it was one of those things where I read up about it, and because I was still coming back into the tabletop world of things, you know, I didn't really have this concept of what was heavy, what was light.
Yeah.
So I just saw it and thought, that looks really cool. I like spaceships. I like strategy. Let's go for that.
Yeah.
And so we did. And 8 hours later, we were incredibly sort of fulfilled by it all, but we're sort of like, wow, this is a bit of a change from, you know, Carcassonne.
It's massive in terms of what, you know, you get something like that and it's like huge, and then you're thinking, well, average playtime, what's kind of average playtime? And then basically you're spending almost like the same length of time you would spend at your job during a day, kind of moving little chitties about and deciding strategies and stuff like that. So it's kind of, you know, that's kind of cool. I mean, where did you go from there? I mean,
I sort of dived off for a while into the RPG side of things for quite a couple of years, I guess. We had a regular Pathfinder group, and we would obviously, once we'd completed sort of the starter box and moved on to the main book and so on, we started constructing our own campaigns. We sort of played around with D&D for a little bit. Fiasco, I mean, sort of an RPG, sort of not, but all of that stuff. So it was just sort of this exploration of the whole tabletop world. I mean, in the background, there was always things like Cards Against Humanity, you know, the really light end of the scale that was going on at the time. But it was just this case of, I'd rediscovered this hobby that I was completely enamored by and was just like, I want to try everything. So I was just trying everything that came my way, like Betrayal at House on the Hill, which continues to be like a big favourite. I know it's completely unbalanced, and some people hate it for that. I sort of love it for that. I mean, like, it's completely bonkers and you just sort of have to go along for the ride. But yeah, Betrayal's like a solid favourite. Blimey, Ticket to Ride is another one that I picked up quite early on. And just really, for several months, I was obsessed with Ticket to Ride. I would play like 10 games a day, mainly because I had the digital version. So I would just continually play digital matches of Ticket to Ride. I was just obsessed with it.
You just disappear for an hour or something like that. Just going to say, right, anyone else want a cup of tea? And then they'd find you 2.5 hours later in the kitchen, and you've not even clicked the kettle down because you're just like saying, one more carriage, one more carriage.
I've got to get across the map. Like,
just one, come on.
You just don't understand. I've got all these tickets.
I've got to block player 1786. That's the third time he's beat me. You don't understand.
But, yeah, and from there, it just sort of snowballed, I guess. I mean, obviously, as I then got a job, having left university, and then had a bit more free cash, so my games collection started expanding, and expanding. I'm trying to think back.
How many games have you got? I mean,
I've tried to keep it under control. Obviously, having now working at this job, I end up with quite a few in my possession. But I have one of those beds that lifts up like an ottoman.
Oh my goodness!
So we've limited the game collection to fit under that bed. Which it does just at the moment. It used to be the old classic IKEA Kallax shelves, and they were quickly overcome. And then games flooded onto my room, and I had a literal wall of games at one point. It was like bricked in. I had to organise them so that it became a solid mass.
Were you like one of the guys you see in the videos, where they do the videos and go, hi, and they've got like the solid mass of every single game?
Yeah, it's sort of like the Iron Throne from Game of Thrones, but instead of swords, just games. At one point, when I joined Tabletop Gaming, the magazine, and we needed to take a picture, I had a serious thought about building a literal throne and sitting in it, and then thought that's really, really pompous and like overblown, but would be kind of funny and ridiculous at the same time.
That would be kind of very, very awesome, wouldn't it? Unless, of course, you did like a kind of a lying on the bed on top of lots of board games, kind of like in that was it that Kevin Spacey film?
Oh god, like American Beauty. American Beauty, nude.
Just like you lying there with a kind of a couple of, you know, a Catan and maybe a couple of cars.
Just a copy of Pandemic, like blocking out my genitals.
Watch out for bad viruses right here.
Oh, Jesus.
That would have made an interesting photo. In fact, maybe that's a cover for a future magazine.
A cover, a spread. We could start page 3 of Tabletop Gaming.
Oh,
I don't know how that would go down.
I don't know. I think, you know, you've got to expand into these things and take some risks, and when you're involved in the world of publishing and no, I mean, if that happens, then obviously I want I don't want credited for that. I'm going to be
I don't think anyone would want credit for that. I'm going to be brutally
honest. This isn't Chris Clue talking about his football boot, his football juicy boot anymore. I want nothing to do with this. You know, we could get our logo and we could put it in the corner. As potentially discussed on a podcast on We're Not Wizards, we present the Matt Jarvis American Beauty board game cover. So you heard it here first, folks. Does that mean that you regularly kind of culling the games that you have? Because it's interesting that you don't, you're kind of almost judging games by their volume as opposed to maybe by their likability. Is that not the case?
In terms of the ones I keep, you mean?
Yeah, in terms of the ones that have to fit under the bed. Because
well, I mean, the bed's a big old space, but there are clear. If something's really big, for instance, at the moment under there, one of the most recent additions is the deluxe edition of Vinhos,
wow.
which is just amazing, but it's huge. And Mechs vs Minions, also a massive, massive box. So there's been like a run of really big boxes that we've had to squeeze under there and sort of had to rearrange everything.
Yeah.
I think the problem is if there were games that I absolutely loved, I would find an excuse. I'm sort of like a notorious hoarder. I own like 1,000 DVDs that I have been told not to bring. We've recently moved house, so my partner told me, you cannot bring those. This is the amount you're allowed to have. This is your space that you have, which I need because otherwise it will just be chaos.
I think, potentially, you could use Mechs versus Minions as a small guest bed because it is some size.
We recently got a cat, and the cat's been using it. Been using the top lid as a bed, which is helped by the fact that Mechs vs Minions is fantastic. So it's been open quite a lot. So the cat has sort of helpfully taken up the lid as its own. Is the cat kind of forcing you? It's like, well, what will we play tonight? And the cat's like kind of gently coming over to you and looking at you and just points and says, well, that's it. It's like Paul the Octopus. Just sort of, we go, what should we play? And the cat goes and sits on a box and makes a meow, and we go, oh, okay. Seriously, the cat. Well, I'm not surprised because I know of cats before that would just sit in front of a cupboard when they want fed and start meowing until they get what they want. So, I mean, you've now got a board game cat. Yes, yeah. Well, that's kind of fantastic. You've just dropped in kind of Vinhos and Mechs and Minions. Are there games kind of at the moment kind of floating your boat that you play on a regular basis just now? So it's a weird one. Again, before I took up this job, it was one of those things where games are obviously quite expensive and you sort of dedicate yourself to a small collection or a smallish collection of games. I think most people. But obviously with this job, I'm now having to move from game to game to game in order to cover them, in order to understand what's coming out and what's grabbing other people's interest. So I suppose it's obviously a massive perk. I'm by no means don't think that I'm trying to knock it, being able to have this amazing opportunity. But at the same time, you don't often get to spend as much time with a few games as perhaps you'd like to. No, I understand completely, because it's when it's a deadline, and I mean when it's a deadline and you have to get something right, you've got to write about something and produce some actual content for it at the same time. It's not just a case of there are board game content that is quite simply let me show you what's inside the box, and then you get the brilliant kind of instructional videos which say, okay, well let's show you how to kind of play it. Reviewing is a different thing altogether, because if you on board games, if you don't get enough time with it, if you get one bad experience, it can really, really kind of put you against kind of playing it again and again and again. So I know where you're coming from. Do you have a set routine for when you're kind of doing these features and reviews? Have you got it kind of down pat onto kind of how you'll go about looking at a new game? So I tend to play with the same group. I have quite a close group of friends who I played board games with before, but also because we're then all in the same rhythm, and because we all have quite different tastes. There are people in there who really like party games, so Exploding Kittens they absolutely love, which I'm fond of, but not head over heels in love with. Yeah. Then myself, I'm obviously more into, I guess, the strategy side of things, some of the deeper side. We do have a couple of people in there who love miniatures, and so bring that to the group. So it's a nice sort of well-rounded group. Yeah. So I try and play with them as much as possible. And also we have, obviously with player numbers, some games require at least 3 people, some require even more than that. Yeah. So it's good to have that sort of baseline. So I always ask them to chip in. It doesn't mean that they'll necessarily influence my review, because I guess ultimately at the end of the day,
Exactly.
it's my opinion. There's my name on it. So if someone wants to throw shade at it, I'll take that and say that's my opinion.
Yeah.
No one else's. But it's always good just to have someone else go, well, what about this?
You flip the table or something like that and just walk off. But no, yeah, you were saying.
I was just going to say, so I guess the way is obviously games come in each week or every couple of weeks, but then we'll try and get everybody together at least a couple of times a month and just sit down and play these games, and then obviously give them some breathing room as well. It always helps to leave it a little while, because when you first crack open a box, there's that initial thing of, the art's really lovely, or the art's not that great, and those things can colour the way you then feel about the gameplay, which is obviously important, but you often have to just give this breathing room to be like, well, okay, maybe it doesn't have the best look, but these mechanics are really interesting, or it goes together really well in this way, or, I didn't realise that, it actually works out in the end, something that I didn't think worked. Having given some time, I really appreciate the fact that they've included that now. Cool. But it obviously depends from game to game. I mean, what do you like at the moment? I mean, what are you? I mean, away from the job, and it must be difficult to get away from the job. Is there currently like the kind of the board game lid that you would like to settle into, like your cat, on a regular basis? Is there anything that you kind of? I guess that you're going to say, well, I'm going to play that, and then you're like, well, I've been playing that quite a few times recently. Is there anything like that at the moment? Yeah, that's actually happened quite a lot recently. So in between reviewing things for the magazine, I've gone back to, especially over Christmas, I went back to Star Wars Destiny quite a lot. I introduced quite a few people to Star Wars Destiny, which is kind of a dangerous path, because you're going to really love this, but also be prepared to spend like £100 on boosters. Oh,
you feel like Emperor Palpatine when you're doing that, because you are essentially the dark side. Yeah, and when you start people in Star Wars Destiny, you are seducing them down this horrendous path.
But it is amazing. It's a really great, tight game. It just flows really well, but it is that thing of collectible games are sort of overwhelming. I mean, I've also tried... I've never been particularly great at Magic, so I'm trying to get better at Magic, because I find it endlessly fascinating. I find it just one of those things that really, really interests me, the community, sort of all the aspects, all the alternative game modes that people do, where they're playing with cards only from May of 1996 or something like that. Yeah. And so I'm trying to get back into that. I've got an, is it Aether Revolt deck? So I've been playing that against a few people.
Because that's one of the latest ones that's gonna come out.
Yeah. So I've been trying to... Well, that's still fresh, because of course that's the other thing, is if I leave it too long, that will then be out of date, and I'll be like, well, I have this deck from like a year or two ago, and people will be like, oh no, we're on the hot new thing now.
Exactly.
Like,
even that's old and busted. This is the new hotness, and you're just like that. What? No, I've still got the arch nemesis of the podcast, Mr. Brian Wade, is still trying to persuade me to play Magic, and as I keep saying to him, I still haven't played Magic, Brian, and you ain't gonna make me yet. But I mean, Destiny, have you got quite a big collection of Destiny? I mean, are you have you gone all out with it and have got lots of booster packs, and have you got multiple little decks on the go? Because me and my son play it, and we spoke really recently about Destiny to say we're in the same boat as you, Matt. We both kind of really, really like it. So where are you with your collection on it?
It's not massive. So I've got the Rey and the Kylo Ren starter decks, and then I probably have I've brought about 10 boosters, something like that, which is a fair number. Yeah. But I do know some close friends. They brought one of the like you find them on the web or whatever, you can just buy the boxes that go out to retailers of like 100 boosters.
The tower ones that are about 80 quid or something. Yeah, they brought one of those.
That. Yeah, so they're way more into it, let's say. But yeah, I mean, if I could, it would be one of those things that I would be probably sinking my time and money into. So it's probably a good thing that I'm being sort of forced to move on.
There'd be a case of like your partner would come home from work and they'd go under the bed just to check what the current board game situation was, and they'd be like, well, what happened to everything, Matt? Sold it.
It's like, where's the cat gone? I sold that.
I sold everything.
Where's the furniture gone?
Where's my shoes?
We don't need it. All we need is a table.
There's a fridge. No, we can just store the milk outside in a plastic bag.
The fridge is just full of dice.
It's just like that. And what are you sitting on, Matt? And it's just you sitting on a massive pile of empty kind of Destiny wrappers on a slight throne built of dice, and you're just sitting there going, nothing. Don't just look away. Leave us alone. The metagame's quite interesting. I think also what do you think about, if you've been playing it quite a lot, what do you think about the difference between playing Kylo against Rey? Because Rey seems to be a very, very powerful person.
Yeah, so I've been combining Rey with Leia as well, because I ended up with Leia out of one of the packs, and I think Leia's a great card.
Yeah.
I've been using her a lot. But I tend to stick with the Kylo Ren stuff. I don't know if it's just because I have a natural tendency to really sort of side with baddies. I mean, not morally, but I just think there's something quite appealing about playing as the bad guys when normally you see the plight of the sort of the good side.
Yeah.
So I have been playing them quite a lot. But yeah, I definitely feel like Rey and the Rey deck, and generally the light side tends to have the upper hand when it comes to a lot of the abilities. But I think it's one of Kylo Ren's abilities that are activated by the dice that just deals, like, I think you pull a card from their hands, and that amount of damage is dealt to one of their characters, which can be devastating depending on what they have, but it's not that hard to pull off as a move. So I think that move is really great.
Yeah.
But generally, I'd have to agree that I think Rey and the light side generally seem to be a little bit more sort of easy to play as.
Yeah, I mean, what happens is I usually play, if I'm playing against my son, I'm usually Kylo Ren, and he's usually Rey. And we were lucky enough that one of my friends, Andy, who's getting another shout out because he's a great guy, he was the guy that went out and bought a whole pile of booster packs, and he gave us basically a pile of about 50 cards that were doubles and a collection of dice as well. So as I say, I kind of went to my son, here you go, have some Destiny cards. And he went, what? Because it was obviously about four times the actual size of the normal kind of basic deck. Which is cool. Is there? I mean, you mentioned Destiny. Is there anything else that you're going back to on a kind of like a regular basis at the moment between kind of roles?
So at the moment, there's also, I think, partly helped by the fact that I've been playing the expansion for review, but Mansions of Madness, the second edition of that, I've been going back to a lot, and I think it's just brilliant. I mean, I really do like Lovecraft. Eldritch Horror is one of my favourite games of all time, and also the Arkham card game, Arkham Horror, the card game, to give it its full title. Again, one of those things where the investment, I mean, it's classic Fantasy Flight, right? You just sort of go like, oh, this is really amazing, and also that's all my money for the rest of time.
Exactly.
But it is really good. I mean, that makes it worse. If it was naff, I think like I wouldn't feel as bad because I'd eventually know that I was going to tail off. But it's one of those things where it got its hooks into me at the end of last year, and over Christmas I just found myself playing it and playing it and playing it.
Yeah.
And into this year I found myself playing it and playing it to the point where I'm like, oh god, I need to like play some of these new games at some point. I just sort of want to just play more Arkham.
Yeah, no, I mean it's see, when you find a game that clicks with you, it's, you know, as I say, for me it's Armada. And I've managed to control myself from buying any more ships from Armada at all, because otherwise I would just go onto my friendly local online web shop and just say, right, I'll have all of these, thanks very much, and just end up with something that would kind of be similar to an actual size kind of Imperial fleet, which is kind of good. I mean, this in terms of I mean, there'd be no doubt hundreds and if not thousands of people that would be kind of love to be in your position in terms of kind of like the games in general, you know, being involved in the board game industry. I mean, 2016 was a fantastic year. I mean, looking back, you know, we had, your size of this world. We had the sad news obviously about Fantasy Flight and kind of Games Workshop. But going forward, Kickstarter seems to keep growing. The industry seems to keep going. We actually seem to get guys. I mean, we've got games like Mechs vs Minions coming out, which are from really big studios producing kind of high quality stuff. And then, I mean, we've got the next level of Pandemic Legacy is going to be coming out as well. So is there anything that you're kind of looking forward to yourself to maybe you'd like to kind of get to the table?
I mean, Pandemic Legacy, the first season I still think is probably the best game I've ever played. I mean, everybody says it, but it's sort of for a reason. It's just, I mean, it's astounding, the first season. And I'm also one of those weird people that really enjoyed Seafall. I mean, I gave it an Editor's Choice badge in the magazine, and people didn't agree with me, let's say, when I put up the review online. But I stand by it and still think, for all its flaws, Seafall is something really, really special.
You gotta love the armchair critics, though, isn't it? You have no idea how to play this game. Actually, I did, and probably played it in concentrated amounts of time. So, yeah, Seafall was, I think, for some reason people just didn't gel with it, or didn't think it was the best game ever, or thought it was scaled back.
It's fair enough. I mean, like I say, it has problems. It has big problems, let's say. And I think, obviously, the amount of hype behind it didn't help at all. It sort of rode in on this unconquerable wave that was Pandemic Legacy. And, I mean, I can't even imagine what it must have been like to be Rob Daviau. No. Because, I mean, you can tell it's made with a lot of thought, a lot of care. It just didn't gel with people, and that's fine. I mean, people have different interests, but I still feel like it is a heck of an achievement for board games. Just maybe not to the same degree as the first Pandemic Legacy, but just one of those really special board games that you sort of just remember. Like I played it several months ago now, but I still think back to it and just think, that was just a really cool experience.
And I mean, it's not like you get like 3 board games a year. You know what I mean? It's not like here's your 3 board games for this year, so everybody's got the right to kind of like say, and pitch in and get angry about stuff. There are hundreds of board games getting released every year, so if you don't like one, you can kind of, move on. Similarly, if you like one an awful lot, you don't have to turn it into kind of your hill to die on, if you know what I mean.
Exactly.
People like stuff. It's one of those horrible things that people might like stuff that you don't like, and vice versa. Otherwise, the world would just be, a little bit more of a dull place. But I mean, is there anything else that you've seen? Well, you'll know, won't you? You'll have a list and saying, right, okay, and stuff that you can't talk about. But is there other things that you're kind of excited for 2017 that you've heard about?
I'm really intrigued about the Dark Souls board game, actually.
Yeah.
I come from the world of video games journalism.
Yes.
So I encountered it while I was still in that world, and then have jumped across, sort of following it, this sort of strange transition alongside Dark Souls of all things. But I backed it on Kickstarter, and I'm just intrigued. I've seen it at shows and sort of seen how it comes together, but I'm really interested, especially having played Eric Lang's Bloodborne card game, which is a very different game.
Yeah, what did you think? What did you think of that? I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
I really, really enjoyed it. I wasn't sure at the start. I think it doesn't. The strange thing about it is it doesn't capture all of Bloodborne exactly. It's sort of this strange meld. It gets the combat of Bloodborne right. It has this real sort of one more hit mentality to it, where you're like, can I get in another hit to obviously get these blood echoes and to get the treasure in order to win? Can I risk that? And often you find yourself just getting, steamrolled by these monsters. But I felt it did that stuff incredibly well. Where it's a little bit strange is in the atmosphere, because it's just a really hard thing to capture the gothic sort of oppressive nature of those games. And I think the Bloodborne card game doesn't necessarily do that, because it's quite quick, and because death has a penalty, but it's not a huge penalty.
Yeah.
Depending on where you're at, I mean, you can obviously build up lots of blood echoes and lose them, but because you're forced to refresh and go back to the Hunter's Dream every 7 cards or so, when you've almost used up your deck, you're not going to lose a huge amount.
Yeah.
But I do think it really did the combat well, and the way it blended sort of if it had just been the card combat on its own, it would have been like a solid, enjoyable game. You would probably play it once, maybe twice, and be like, okay, I've sort of had my fill, I see what it's doing. But where it brings in sort of the sly social deception stuff, where you can, you're attacking the monster and getting points, but also the instant effect or side effect does damage to other players.
Yeah.
And you choose when to exploit those effects to sort of weaken your friends who you need to kill these monsters. You can't take them down alone.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're trying to beat them. And then you can bring in that element that I love social deception, but you bring in sort of the, oh, I'm so sorry I had to play this card. I only had that left in my hand, which of course doesn't need to be true.
I had absolutely no choice in kind of doing you over in this next
all I had was cannons and so
Yeah.
on. So I think it brings that stuff in a way it's just sort of unexpectedly brilliant. And it really, we had people playing with us who had never played Bloodborne. They had no idea what Bloodborne the video game was about, and they were as taken in as we were, which I think says something about what Eric managed to achieve with it. I thought it was quite just really, really impressive as a design.
Do you think that it maybe suffered because, and being honest, with the Dark Souls board game being there, maybe people were expecting something that did have kind of the miniatures? Let's face it, there's a lot of people, and you and me will probably personally know people that bought into the Dark Souls board game to get themselves a little Ornstein, to get themselves a little Smo, to buy themselves a little, Sif and Artorias, and and you think people kind of went, oh, Bloodborne, excellent, let's see what the minis are going to be like on that.
Yeah, it would have been nice to see, because those designs are fantastic.
Yes.
From Software, the developer, they do video game art like nobody else really does nowadays. It's really, really nice. But I think, I don't know, it feels like a different beast to Dark Souls in many ways, because Bloodborne, obviously there's one game. Yeah, sorry, accidental pun.
That's okay, that's fine. I'm leaving that in.
But Bloodborne is such a different game in terms of, first of all, it's on its own, whereas Dark Souls, you have the entire trilogy to pull from.
Yeah.
But Bloodborne has more of a sort of, I guess, consistent aesthetic. It goes to weird places. There's sort of like alien things and like weird blobby things with eyes and all sorts. But in many ways, they're sort of overcomplicated. And I think as minis, they wouldn't necessarily work because, you're not talking about war game miniatures here. You're talking about board game miniatures, which can be really nice, but are never really super high quality. And I think a lot of that intricate design in Bloodborne, all the hair on these werewolf style monsters, all the extra eyes, as I say, that would be lost. Whereas with Dark Souls, you have that, people sometimes criticize Dark Souls for essentially just being people in armor, being knights, but that works in miniatures because you have flat surfaces, you have sort of this sheen and these smooth round edges that you can then craft quite nicely into these. The minis look really nice. Again, you're talking about a board game, not a war game, although it's pricey, it's not extravagant, some might say, but you're still getting a decent quality out of it. So I think that makes a big difference, and I think they made the right call there.
I think it'll be interesting to see it. What I'm interested to see is, and I've said this a couple of times now, is the mechanics. Because I am a big Dark Souls person, and there's a whole group of us that I know that we are all big Dark Souls people, and we've all backed the game, and we're interested to see kind of what happens with it. What are they going to do with the mechanics? Because the main thing, as you know yourself about Dark Souls, is the mechanics. And if they don't manage to get that maybe as right, then there might be a couple of people that will be kind of disappointed, but we shall have to see. Anything else that you have kind of thought, that looks maybe a bit interesting as well?
I haven't managed to get a copy of Gloomhaven yet, but I really would like to get a copy of Gloomhaven at some point, just to see what's going on. You and me
both. I've now seen people actually starting to sell them on various kind of Facebook groups, and I think, unlike normal, where you'll get somebody saying, and here is my kind of others seven sins kind of pledge, and I'm going to ask for X amount of money for it. I think I've seen one saying, okay, I'm going to say, here's my copy of Gloomhaven, and they've said it's 300 quid they want for it.
My God.
And they had to run and hide because the comments, wow, it was like, yeah. I mean, you've been in the video game industry. You can imagine what the comments would be like when you put a post up like that.
Any comments section, I think.
Yeah, but yeah, so that was kind of an interesting chat. I think the moderator came in and went, listen, if people miss the Kickstarter, then that's their kind of lookout. They should have done it at the time. If the guy wants to offer it at a price, then that's fine. So, yeah, I think, I don't know if you've heard, but I believe, and you're probably more in the know than me, but I believe Gloomhaven's going to be going to a second Kickstarter campaign in order to do the reprint, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a strange one as well because Isaac Childress, yeah, he's also got plans. I mean, I think originally planned to do the Kickstarter for Founders of Gloomhaven this month or next month.
Yeah,
and I guess that's obviously now being pushed back by a little ways.
Yeah,
but it's this just a really intriguing thing where he clearly has this big vision for it.
Yeah,
where you've got Gloomhaven, which is the co-op, legacy game essentially, and then you've got Founders of Gloomhaven, which is more of your worker placement competitive spin prequel thing.
Yeah,
and it's just interesting to see people do. I mean, those aren't necessarily brand new concepts, but they're sort of delivered in such a way that I haven't really seen a lot. I mean,
no,
it certainly happened in the past, but I'd never really seen it.
Did you see his previous work, Forge War?
No, I'm not familiar.
Forge War, we did an episode about it way back at the beginning of the podcast, and it is a worker placement game where you do worker placement, but then the worker placement allows you to weaponize your character, and then you go off on quests. So it sounds quite similar to the kind of the Gloomhaven kind of Legends kind of worker placement kind of thing. But Forge War's a very, very good game, and me and Colin had a lot of fun with it, so it's worthwhile checking out. Have you looked at Charterstone?
No, it's sort of at the fringe of my
I'm sure you've got radar. A list.
Yeah, there's a lot coming in, but it's definitely on there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just one of those things where I mean, yeah, there's so much coming up, and then obviously just things piling on. I mean, there was the Batman. I mean, we're having Toy Fair at the moment, and there's stuff coming up. Obviously, Gen Con and so on. Not that far from now, but there was Monolith's working on a Batman board game, and there's like new versions of Codenames coming, and there's just suddenly this explosion and.
Terminator board game is being announced, and then
so Space Goat's just sort of racking up its stuff because Evil Dead's not out yet, and they've announced Terminator. They're also doing a thing based on The Howling, the Joe Dante movie, and it just seems to all be going a bit mad.
There's one on The Thing. I mean, did you see the Weta have released their Kickstarter on GKR?
Yeah, I spoke to the Weta guys very recently.
Did you? Right.
Because they sent me a message because they're in New Zealand and they were like, we can talk now, and it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, so I had to suddenly get all my stuff together. And the guy, I mean, they were lovely. The team over there is absolutely lovely, and they were like, it's 10 o'clock at night over here, and I was like, it's like 8 in the morning here.
How's this going to work?
It was lovely for them to speak to me because they must have so much going on.
Oh no, they've had that. They've had that on the Kickstarter. I think there's already been comments on the Kickstarter about why aren't these guys replying to the comments, and I think it's because they're probably asleep. That's why. Yeah,
but I mean that stuff looks incredible. I mean, Weta. Like, I'm a film buff. I mean, Lord of the Rings is one of my favourite. Yeah. Who doesn't love Lord of the Rings? But
I mean, come on, bring me your fire if you don't, kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, you're, as you said at the top of the show, one of the first things you had is you went out and you got lots and lots of these Lord of the Rings minis. So I mean, this must be kind of like double excitement for you at the moment. Yeah,
and then obviously it has like anime stylings to the robots. They have this sort of like weird sort of cel-shaded look to them, even though they're obviously just minis, but they have this real distinctive like bright colours, like very 80s sort of Gundam, or not necessarily Transformers, but this real sort of Japanese styled look to them and then you have all the sponsorship on them, and it just looks.
I'm just
amazing.
I'm interested to see what it's just like Riot Games did with Mechs and Minis, and you're interested to see with a company that does have a kind of obviously a production budget to put a lot of things out there before they kick off the Kickstarter campaign, what they're going to deliver, and it looks kind of really, really, really excited.
Yeah, I mean, before Riot and Mechs vs Minions, I would have been quite skeptical of sort of first time, because board games are getting so popular. You're seeing quite a lot of people jump in and sort of ride the wagon, so to speak. But I mean, Riot did it the right way. They couldn't have done Mechs vs Minions any better in many ways. I mean, it's an astounding game. The box is very big. Maybe that's the only knock against it, but there's so much in there. But yeah, the fact that they've managed to pull that off, and they pulled it off with a clear sort of passion and understanding. It wasn't just, we have the biggest video game in the world, like, let's throw something together. It was this, like, we want to make a really good game. And actually, I think Mechs vs Minions was like a limited run to begin with, like 30,000 units or something like that.
Yeah, it was an interesting way to do it, in the fact that they could have made more and just went to the sellout, because they didn't go through a Kickstarter campaign.
No.
Which has made it interesting as to why Weta did, I guess. Which is, I guess, but there's two ways that we look at it. You could look at Kickstarter being kind of an exposure kind of thing, and if they're going to get exposure, then it's an easy way to do it. They did a countdown, they did press releases, they did, they kind of almost did it the same way as you would see maybe on a video game. But
I'd guess it would be down to the publisher. Obviously, Riot was doing it itself, and with League of Legends behind it, has this big budget. I wonder if Weta, a lot of its normal budget comes from the film studios that then ask it to produce these effects. So obviously, it's teamed up with Cryptozoic and Matt Hyra, who's the designer of it.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that was a Cryptozoic decision.
Cryptozoic,
to sort of say, like,
did they do? Was it Ghostbusters? Did they do? Am I right or wrong?
Yes, I think that was Cryptozoic.
That was Cryptozoic. I'm sure you'd correct me and just go, no, get out. I mean, it's just interesting. I'm just really interested to see how that kind of campaign works out. In terms of, like, as I've already said, you've probably got one of what a job that a lot of people would maybe look at and go, this sounds absolutely awesome. I mean, it's not as glamorous as people kind of probably make out in their mind. I mean, when you kind of are working on the magazine, and there's also the website side of things as well. I mean, is it constant kind of planning? I mean, are you in the process of having to kind of turn away kind of board games that land on your desk with kind of like, thank you, but we can't cover it letters? I mean, is that where we are? Is there a flood of games kind of heading your way at the moment as well?
All the time. It's especially with Kickstarter, it's one of those really tough things where a lot of the stuff that comes through, for understandable reasons, because board games are expensive to produce, and you've got a lot of first-time designers who come through and they have these amazing ideas. I mean, you can have the best idea in the world, but it doesn't necessarily end up getting made for any number of reasons.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where Kickstarter campaigns in general, we try to be. We are obviously trying to do as wide a sort of birth of the industry as we can. We want to show the big Fantasy Flight stuff, the sort of multi-million Kickstarter campaigns, down to your one-man team or one-person team working away with a passion project that maybe is looking for, maybe just $1,000 or £1,000 on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
We want to cover all that stuff, because just because it's smaller doesn't make it any less interesting or any less important. But it's really hard to sort of get the judge right. And a lot of people come through and they say, oh, we have an announcement about a Kickstarter campaign that's going to happen 2 months from now. And it's like, we can't look at that, because if your Kickstarter campaign comes out, I mean, for one thing, we're ultimately here to try and tell people. We're trying to tell people what they should be looking at, or what they should be, taking interest in terms of the hobby and in terms of mechanics or concepts or themes.
Yeah.
But we're not here to just say, here's a game, go back it, or here's a person, you should give them money.
Yeah.
That's not what we're about. I mean, reviews are in some ways a judgment of you should buy this, you shouldn't buy this, or you should play this, you shouldn't play this. But we're not here to, like any, not to blur into it, but like any good sort of publication, you have to get the balance of fairness in terms of, here's an interesting thing, but maybe don't give it your money. Maybe look at this, but it doesn't necessarily deserve your money. So a lot of the Kickstarters that come through and they don't have a campaign yet, we won't cover, like, as simple as that. There are of course exceptions. I mean, if it's from a big company or a proven designer, then that's interesting on its own, because you sort of trace their career and where they're going next. So if Matt Leacock came out with a Kickstarter, when the Kickstarter went live, we would probably say, hey, go look at this. But we wouldn't say Matt Leacock will do a Kickstarter in 2 months. So a lot of the Kickstarter stuff we wait until it's at least past its target. But even then, I mean, things change, an unbelievable amount before they come out. And, we've seen so many delays to big Kickstarter projects that it's a really sort of hard tightrope to walk a lot of the time.
Is that why you've got kind of like you've got the website there as well to kind of provide, because obviously the magazine stuff, like, it takes time. You've got to decide your articles, you've got to decide what you're covering, get all the content in, and then put it out to print, and that all takes time. Is that why the website's there, to maybe pick up the kind of the smaller snippets that you want to put out kind of straight away as well?
Yeah, certainly. So obviously the website is much, much quicker. I mean, now that we're bi-monthly, we can react a lot quicker. That was part of the reason to go bi-monthly, as well as the fact that people just wanted more. But it also helps us look at things a lot quicker. And we have news stories in the magazine, and they tend to be the bigger stuff. But you're right. The smaller, the website, you can put up a smaller story that's like, oh, hey, just check this out, or here's a small thing that might deserve your interest. And then, as you say, for the magazine, we really concentrate on those deep dives when there's something tangible, when there's like a concept that's been set in stone or a design that's been set in stone. We can talk to the designer and say, why did you do this, or how did you do this? And that's what we sort of really want to capture with the magazine, is not just looking at the games and how they play, but also the people that make them, the people that play them. And this, as I say, sort of all across the industry, but also on every level, from sort of the complete game on the shelf and the people that sell the games, down to here's the conception of a game, here's how an idea gets turned into a working game. Because especially with Kickstarter, people don't necessarily understand. It's getting better and better as Kickstarter gets older. And people use it more, but people still get, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but people still get very upset if something's delayed or if something doesn't turn out quite as it was promised. And part of this is, just throwing a light on how it's really bloody difficult at the end of the day to get a board game made. They're incredibly popular, and you can sort of cite these Kickstarter projects that make millions, but they're still really, really hard. If you just have an idea and you take it to Kickstarter, you'll probably not get any money for it. It takes a heck of a lot of work.
There's a lot of production stuff that's going in. I mean, I've been speaking to, I spoke to, recently we had the series with Peter Blenker, and as you and I are both aware, he ran the Subterra campaign that went on to make in excess of £350,000. To him, that was just like, that's amazing. It's kind of put me at a whole nother level in case of where his funding was going to be, what he was going to be able to achieve, and what he was going to be able to do for everybody that backed him on that. And we did a series of small kind of interviews with him on a week by week basis, as he kind of, just to catch up and let people understand exactly what's going through somebody's head, because not just on a campaign that's maybe needing more publicity, which is, I'm sure, a lot of people end up, having to look at. But what about the ones that are kind of successful, like Dark Souls, for instance? I mean, they're smashing stretch goals left, right, and centre, and that was the same with kind of like Subterra as well. I mean, it went through, I think, most of its stretch goals within the first 48 hours. So our discussion went from how do you think you're going to promote the game to what actually you're going to do if you reach kind of like 150k. Kind of where you kind of going to go with that. Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, people need to be, or are slowly being more educated into how kind of like the Kickstarter kind of process will work. But there are obviously going to be people that will back that all the way, and there will be some people that will think they are paying for a pre-order and they expect the game kind of next week. I mean, going forward, have you got a plan for where you're going with the magazine? I mean, have you had to rethink how you're covering things even in the last kind of year, in terms of the market?
So I took over in September.
Yeah.
From Rob Berman, who was the first editor. He set it all up, and he did just an incredible job. I mean, I was a reader before I was the editor.
Yeah.
And I was really sort of taken in by just how upbeat and sort of how just loving of the industry the magazine was. I mean, especially compared to, there's not really another magazine for board games, miniatures, RPGs, etc. I mean,
no.
That covers all of that stuff for everybody. There's not another magazine like it in the UK. And I mean, we obviously want to continue that. And Rob did, as I say, just a great job of this welcoming tone. I mean, you can be into RPGs, there's something for you. You can be into Euros, there's something for you. You can be into Ameritrash, there's something for you. Miniatures, there's something for you.
Yeah.
And that, we only have so many pages, and so obviously that those scales shift a little bit each time.
Yeah.
But it's striking that balance. But there's also as I say, this, I can't speak for Rob, but for myself, like I say, I just find the idea of speaking to the people behind not just the games, but also, people that play these games professionally at national competitions. How did they get into that? Why that game?
Yeah.
Just these stories of people, because anyone can read the blurb on the back of a box. Anyone can read the description on Board Game Geek. Anyone can sort of, read the instruction manual and just go, oh, here's the mechanics.
Yeah, exactly.
Here's how it works.
Yeah,
but it's understanding how, that all comes together to, like, this sounds like really pretentious and so on, but it's not just, here's how you play the game. It's like, here's the experience. Here's how you feel as you play a game.
No.
Here's like the sweat that builds on your brow because, like, oh Christ, they're turning over a card and it could be this card, or oh God, you've got to roll these dice and you need X number of successes to pass. It's those moments and the way people react to those, the way people make those, that I think is sort of most interesting. So, as I say, there was a lot of that stuff already, and that's the stuff that I really want to put a focus on. And obviously, there will always be the stuff about the games themselves, looking at, that's partly what reviews are for, looking at these games saying, here's what's good, here's what's bad.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, the direction for the magazine is just this real, I guess, deep dive. We want to be the magazine that people come to and they go, I love this hobby. Here's a magazine that makes me love this hobby and understand this hobby even more. And sort of appreciate what people do to bring these games to people's tabletops, to sort of, just to make people happy. Games exist to make people happy at the end of the day. I think board games, more than perhaps any other medium, exist to make people happy and to bring people together. I mean,
the community is rather fantastic.
It is brilliant.
I mean,
coming from video games, it's just been amazing to see how friendly everyone is, how welcoming and supportive absolutely everyone is.
Yeah, I mean that's why it's like, as I say, when I was kind of writing for video games as a hobby, the chances of speaking to kind of like what you would what would you would say were your kind of your, I guess, people you respected and in some cases borderline heroes in the industry? The chances of speaking to those people were fairly slim. And I mean, in the last year, I mean, I kind of joked in the green room about kind of like, here's the list of all the people that we've spoken to so far and We're Not Wizards, and it says I'm not sure what we're going to do for 2017 to kind of start that off or do better than that. But I mean, just the names that we've had on here, and it's not like it's like yourself. I sent you a message and said, do you want to come on and talk on the podcast? And you said, yeah, sure. There wasn't any kind of what's in it for me or what we're going to do, or we're going to have to talk about exposure and here's what you can ask about and here's what you can't ask about. I mean, that's been every single person that we've had on, be it kind of John Gilmore, Eduardo Baraf, all the way through to Jamie Stegmaier, Brad Talton. They've all been just really, really nice people that are genuinely passionate about their jobs and what they're involved in, and been very, very kind of easy to talk to. And that's a kind of a testament, I guess, to the kind of the board gaming community. They just seem to be a really, really kind of nice bunch so far. I don't know if you feel the same.
No, yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, in my first couple of weeks, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm in charge of this now. What the heck do I do? So it was like, okay, let's think of the games that I enjoy and let's work out from there. And it was like, I got in touch with Matt Leacock and he immediately came back to me, and it was kind of, this continuous attempt not to sort of gush and be like, oh my God, I love Pandemic. Oh my God, you have my name. Oh my God.
You just didn't want to go, I love you.
Yeah,
like,
you sort of have to,
awesome. Kind of like
I'm a professional journalist, man, so I have to sort of play it cool and be like, you have to go. Can I send you some questions for this magazine and all of these sorts of things? Provide some assets for my publication. But at the same time,
if you put on that accent at the same time, then Jack, do the professional voice. Somebody comes over and says, Matt, you just wrote "You're awesome, 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 awesome" 15 times, and attached a big picture saying "You're very awesome. Do you want to put on the proper text?"
Exactly, but at the same time, the reason I do this is because I love board games. I wouldn't do it if I didn't. I don't think I'd have this job if I didn't. I would hope I wouldn't have this job, in all honesty. Yeah. If I didn't love them to bits and just think they're the best thing going. And so it is just sort of containing, I have to be professional. I have to talk to people and find out things. But I think there's a lot more sort of warmth in the world of board games. I mean, to name drop people. So Matt Leacock, like Alan R. Moon I went to, and it was like, Ticket to Ride is incredible. I think this was when Rails and Sales was coming out. We were talking to him about that. But again, he just came straight back to me. He sent me a picture of him stood on a train. And I was like, oh my God, that's incredible. And just everybody I've gone out to, I've had some people say, oh, I'm really sorry, I can't do it. But I think very, very rarely have I had no response, or I don't think I've ever had a rude reply from anyone. And it's the same with, as you say, it's the same with all the writers. I mean, I have to give just a bucket of credit to the other writers on the magazine, both the ones who have written in the past, who I read, and the ones who I'm working with now, who I also get the pleasure to read. But they were just such amazing writers, and they just are so passionate and so, I guess, obsessed with just digging out the corners of the industry and looking at these fantastic stories and just, talking to equally fantastic designers and publishers, and together it just makes for what I would hope is just a lovely, great big hug of a magazine where you read it and just feel good. You're like, it's like, if you can't carry all your friends with you on a train, or you can't all fit in the same armchair, hopefully opening the magazine is like sort of a gaming group in paper form, and you just think these people are, maybe friends is a little bit strange in today's day and age, but these are people that I want to chat with about board games, or I want to listen to talk about board games. And just like yourself, this podcast serves as just a welcoming way for people to come together, maybe not in the same room and maybe not talking back and forth. Maybe it's one way direction sometimes, one way communication. Yeah. But it's just a way to go, I love board games. This other person loves board games.
Yeah.
Everybody loves board games. What a fantastic time.
No, I mean, I would seriously say, like, listeners and things like that, I've made a lot of friends in the last year since we started the podcast, because people went, oh, that's cool. Do you fancy having a chat sometimes? Like, yeah, come on. I mean, we'll speak to anybody on the podcast about any kind of game going, but it's always great to hear, like, and you're no different as the kind of the passion that is kind of out there, as you know, for the hobby. And I'm conscious of the time, and I'm keeping you far too long, and this has been...
That's fine, keep me as long as you want.
You know, for people who for whatever reason, and we never judge, but they haven't picked up the magazine or looked at the website, I mean, where's the easiest way and the best way to kind of get hold? Because you can get the magazines pretty much most places nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, we're actually international, so obviously I assume most of the people listening will be UK, but we are around the world. We're over in the US, we're even down in Australia, we're like up in Canada, Sweden, I think a lot of Europe is covered. But in the UK, you can find us in obviously all good retailers, but the best way, I would guess, is just go to the website. To plug it, it's tabletopgaming.co.uk, and there you can obviously find our news, which is the latest up-to-date stuff, but you can pick up the latest issue. If you just want to check out the latest issue, you can pick up a subscription. If you want to support us like that, that's amazing. Try one issue, then subscribe. Just do what you feel is best. Hopefully you love the magazine enough to stick with it. I'm not going to press you into it. I just I just want to get the word out there, and it's fine.
It's no, seriously, because it is a good magazine. It reminds me of and I'm an old man, but it does in some ways. It reminds me of the days of kind of like Edge magazine, and also things like kind of like your Mean Machines of this world, and Play as well, the old kind of Super Nintendo magazine, because it's like different. There's a whole load of passion behind it. There are kind of interesting articles, and and it's weird to say that if you'd said to me 3 years ago, there's going to be a kind of a magazine for board games, and it'd be like, nah, there's not, kind of thing, because it would never, who would have interested in launching a kind of a magazine, but it's doing well. It seems to be growing from kind of strength to strength. Is there any place else you can find you? Are you on the Twitters and the Facebooks of this world as well? I take it you've got pages for tabletop gaming as well.
Yeah, so you do a better job of plugging it than I do. So we are on Twitter. It's at Tabletop Mag. Okay. Is our Twitter, and Facebook, I believe, is the same. So it's /Tabletop Mag.
If you do a search for it.
Yeah, but again, if you go to the main website, you'll find us there. I mean, you can find me on Twitter. I won't even give out my handle, but you can find me if you root around, if you really feel inclined.
Have a look.
It's probably not a great idea. I largely post pictures of cats and badly made homemade pizzas.
You are then 98% of the internet.
Exactly. This is why I got a cat. It was just sort of like a career move. It's like, well, I have to boost my social media presence now, so I best invest in a cat.
I kind of think we now need to have at least one photograph of your cat in the Mechs vs Minions box.
It will happen.
It has to happen.
I'll send you one after this is done.
I might consider actually using it as episode art. So people will go, there's a cat in a box, what's that in? It's like, well, you can't tell if the cat is, if the cat is happy it's playing board games or not happy it's playing board games. It is in a Mechs and Minions kind of box. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that I could... Well, there's maybe a couple of things I can say, but if you want to kind of keep an eye on what we're up to, we are also all over the internet. You can find us on Twitter at We're Not Wizards. We're on Facebook at We're Not Wizards. We're on Instagram at We're Not Wizards. You can find our website, which is we'renotwizards.com. You can email us, which is magic at we'renotwizards.com or .co.uk. Matt, listen, thank you very, very much for taking the time out to speak to us.
Thank you for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's I really appreciate kind of you spending the time to chat away. There is obviously 2 more things that we have to do. The first thing is to remember that we are many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Matt?
Definitely not.
Definitely
never wizards.
Never wizards. We take trees and we turn them into magical pieces of paper that have information about a fabulous hobby, but we're not wizards. And the second thing to do is to say goodbye to all the listeners out there. So it's a goodbye from Matt.
Thanks very much for having me. Goodbye.
And it's a goodbye from me. Stay safe, roll 6s, read a magazine on the bus on the way to work for a change, instead of looking at your phone. But until the next time, goodbye.